So now that we've learned to set up some flat lays and photograph them in another video, let's do the same thing, but this time we'll use a phone. Maybe you don't have access to a DSLR or you don't have one available to you at the time, you need a photo in a hurry. Using your phone might be a good way to do that. So today we'll be shooting with an iPhone 8 Plus, but you can use any phone that you have available. We will be using the same background, same props. It's the exact same layout that we did use in our flat lay video, so you can compare the results side by side. And we are using the same lighting, so this is just a large softbox, and it's kind of to mimic the window light that will probably be available to you in your home, since that's what you will most likely be using. So let's get started. So now that we have our scene with our jewelry set up, let's go ahead and pull out our phone. I'm just going to use the default camera app here. I'm not going to use any sort of a specialized app since this is pretty universal and this is what everybody has. Yours will probably look a little bit different depending on what phone you're working with. This one in particular is an iPhone 8 Plus, so it will be similar to the interface in other iPhones depending on what exact model you have, but it will look different if you have another phone. But every phone camera should have comparable settings that are similar to this. So we're not going to use anything too crazy. So let's start with just the standard photo mode. Now you can, if you want to, you can zoom in, you can zoom out. In this case, we're not going to zoom too much. You do want to be careful about zooming in too far when you're using your phone, because at some point, you get past the optical zoom and you get into what's called digital zoom. Do you see how this starts to get kind of grainy? You can really see it up in here. It starts to get a little grainy, a little bit blurry. That's because you're not really zooming with the lens anymore. You're essentially just cropping in on the image and it's removing pixels and lowering quality. So on a phone, don't zoom if you don't have to. The other thing I'm going to suggest is that you shoot it horizontally. I know everybody's instinct these days seems to be to shoot it in portrait mode, but when you're shooting a product, you typically do want to go landscape instead of portrait. So you want it wide, like horizontal, instead of vertical, because that's the way that most places are going to have you upload your photos if you upload them to Etsy or something similar. So now that we have all of our settings done, let's go ahead and take our first image. So I'm just going to hold the phone as steady as I can. Tap right on that charm in the front because that's going to be the main focus point of my image. So that's where I want the camera to focus. So I'm going to tap that and take our first shot. Now you can try a couple of different angles, maybe move around a little bit. I think I'm getting a little bit of reflection if I go too far one way or the other. And I'm pretty happy with that first angle, but let's get in a little bit tighter. Again, you want to focus up and take a shot. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So let's take a look and see what we have in the photo mode so far. So after reviewing the photos that we just took in the photo mode, I decided that it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I kind of wanted these gemstones that are here in the background to be a little bit more out of focus to really help keep all of the emphasis on our subject here. So what I've decided to do is switch it over into portrait mode. You might have similar modes in a different model or type of camera. But essentially what this is doing is it's blurring out the background a little bit. So the disadvantage to photographing with your phone as opposed to a DSLR or another type of camera is that you don't have as much control over your subject. Over your camera settings. So sometimes you are able to manipulate it just by changing the settings on your phone. So the portrait setting is a default setting that will automatically detect what it thinks is the subject of the image. So in this case, the bracelet, and it will try to blur out everything that's behind it. In this case, the gemstones. And that's exactly what I wanted to do. So if I were able to control the settings myself, I would just enlarge the aperture to lower my depth of field and get that blurred effect, but I can't do that here. So I'm going to use the phone settings to do it in any way that I can. So again, I'm just going to tap on this little charm here, since that's the piece of the jewelry that's closest to the camera. That's what I want to focus on. So now we're focused. Let's take an image. Let's try a slightly different angle from even a little bit lower. Okay, I think that looks pretty good to me. So let's pull these up and take a closer look. Okay, so now we've taken a few photos on our phone and we have a couple of photos to work with. So let's take a look at what we have. Now we did use two separate settings, so this is what it looks like on the photo setting. I think I like the portrait setting a little bit better because it does throw those gemstones in the background a little bit more out of focus, and I like that. I think that this is my favorite angle. So I personally always like to keep a copy. I like to keep the original of anything that I do. So I'm going to go in here and duplicate it, make a copy so that we can go back and compare our edits to the original. So let's go to our new copy now. And we'll just hit edit up here. So this is just the basic editor that comes with the iPhone 8 Plus. You can use whatever editing app you choose, or you can use whatever comes on your phone if you have a different model. That's entirely up to you, but we'll just be dealing with the basic settings right now, so it should have comparable settings. We're not going to do anything too crazy here. All we're looking to do is adjust the tone and the color and make sure everything looks good. So there are a few different buttons down here. Let's start with the crop. This is usually the first place that I start. I just want to get out all of that extra background that we don't need. Crop in a little bit more. In this case, we're trying to keep it horizontal instead of going too square with it. So I'm going to keep that in mind as I'm cropping. I think I like that. I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll stick there. Over here, you find all sorts of filters. If you just kind of want to slap something on and post it to Instagram, maybe that's a good way to go. I personally like to do everything myself, so I would stick away from some of these, especially if they're going on some sort of a shop or like Etsy. I tend to think that they might look kind of cheesy. So let's go in and do our own edits. So this is our main editing page. So as you scroll through, it'll give you all of these different settings that you can adjust. So let's start by adjusting the tone, and then we'll take a look at the color. So going back to the beginning, the first thing I want to do is look at the exposure. Now this is looking a little bit dark to me, so I want to bring those tones up. So I'm just going to slide the slider a little bit. Now the exposure does what's called a global adjustment. So that means that it will look at all of the tones in an image and it will raise them all up equally or lower them all equally, depending on if you're brightening or darkening. But the main idea is a global adjustment will affect everything equally. So we just want to be careful not to bring these highlights too far. Do you see how we're starting to blow this area out here and we're losing all of that nice detail? That means that I've gone a little bit too far. So I want to bring this back down, maybe to about 14 or 15. That's about where I was happy. So let's keep it there. And let's go through to our highlights and our shadows. So exposure was a global adjustment, the highlights and the shadows will specifically target the highlights or the shadows of the image, which is a pretty handy tool, especially in a situation like this where you have a white backdrop and you do have some heavier shadows in here. So I'm actually going to start with the shadows. I would like to bring those up a little bit. This is a little more contrasty than I was kind of hoping for, so let's bump that up a little. So do you see how it's bringing all of these shadows up just a little bit? Let's compare. This is the original, and this is where we're at now. So that just brightened it up a little bit more. I think I'm pretty happy with that right now, so let's go over to the highlights. I don't think I want to do too much here, maybe just bump them up a tiny bit. But I'm afraid of losing too much detail down here, and I went a little bit too far, so let's bring that back. Right there. And I think that's our sweet spot. Okay, so scrolling through the rest of these settings, we have contrast. I'm pretty happy with that, the brightness. Let's play with that and see if we'll bring anything to this image by bringing it up a bit. Yeah, a couple of points I think help it out a little bit, so we'll leave it right there. And at this point, I'm pretty happy with the exposure. I think it looks bright enough. I think the bracelet is popping out from the background really well. So let's go in and play with the colors, because this bracelet has all of these lovely little rainbow beads. I don't know if you can really see them that well on this shot, but they're really popping out in person. So I just want to go in there and really bring those colors to life, because I don't feel like this picture is doing them justice right now. So let's go in. Now there are two different color settings that you will find that seem pretty similar. So we have saturation and we have vibrance. The difference between the two is that the saturation is a global adjustment. So that means that it will affect all colors equally. The vibrance will specifically look for tones that are less saturated, and it will boost those up a little bit more. So say you have all of these purples in the image, they're fairly saturated, but I think they can come up a little bit more. These tiny little points of blue are actually pretty saturated, so the vibrance slider will probably prioritize the purple over the blue. So saturation is a global adjustment. The vibrance will boost those colors that are desaturated a little bit more to kind of even it out. So that being said, I'm going to go in with the vibrance slider first, and I'm going to play with that. And that's exactly what it's doing. See how, watch the purple? See how saturated the purple gets? Now I'm going to bring it back, and watch the blue. See how the blue stays pretty constant until we get to about this point right here? That's because the blue is already more saturated. So this is actually a little bit further than I wanted to go, so I'm going to take that back a touch. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now I want to go in and just boost up all the tones. So we're going to go back to saturation and boost that up a little bit. There we go. I think we brought a little more life to that. Now what I am seeing is I think that this image is a little more warm toned than I had hoped for. So let's cool that down a little bit by going over to our temperature slider, or our warmth slider. So as we bring the warmth up, it will add a little bit more yellow. So I'm sure you can see. If you bring it down, it'll add a little more blue. So it'll just get warmer or cooler. It's as simple as that. So this is where we started. I just want to cool that off a little bit. I'm seeing some yellow tones, primarily in this gemstone right here and in a couple of these stones back here. They're just looking a little bit yellow. So let's bring that down. Okay, I think I'm happy right there, right at about -10. That's looking pretty good to me. Now, the last thing that I want to do is go in and adjust the sharpness. So pretty much every image, no matter how good it looks in the camera or on your phone, can benefit from a little bit of additional sharpening. Now you don't want to go too far, because then it just looks really unnatural. See how we're starting to get all of these artifacts and it's sharpening all of the grain down here? Just doesn't look too good, right? So let's tone that down. Now that's what we're working with from the start. Okay, so let's zoom back out and look at the whole thing as one image. I don't want to bring it up too far, maybe just about 10 or 11 points, or 12, that works for me. Yeah, and I think that looks pretty good. I just brought a little bit more definition to our beads in here. And I'm pretty happy with that. So those are really the basic adjustments. There are some more things in here that you can come in and play with. If you want to, you can add a vignette. So that can, whoop, that was a little bit too far. You can either lighten up the edges by going in one direction or you can darken it. I don't think that that helps this image, so I'm just going to leave it as it is. Seeing if there's anything else that we didn't go over. The black point. So the black point will, it's pretty straightforward actually. It'll just bring down the blacks in your image. So this is something that can be really useful if you're shooting something that's really contrasty, or if you just feel like your image is a little bit washed out or just needs to punch a little bit more. So when I brought the black point down, you can see that it kind of washes everything out. And I just want to bring that up just a little bit. That was a little bit too far, maybe just around 10 or 15 points. Yeah, so that just kind of helps to add a little bit more definition and make it a little bit punchier. So at this point, I'm pretty happy with our adjustments, so I'm going to say done. Okay, so let's compare that to where we started. So this is our edited image, and this is where we started. Zoom in a little bit closer so you can see that better. So see how it's a little bit underexposed, maybe a little too warm toned. It just doesn't really look like our bracelet is popping out, and it could use for a color adjustment. It needs a little bit of saturation. And here's our edited image, which really just brings that bracelet to life and really does it the justice that it deserves. So that's pretty much it for phone editing. It is pretty simple and straightforward. Every phone and every app will be a little bit different, so go in and play around with your settings and see what they all do. Honestly, that's a lot of photography, and editing in particular is just experimentation and seeing what you like. So find your favorite app, jump in there and have some fun.